Yes, this is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. We are in Park City, Utah at the Sundance Film Festival following the documentary track dealing with the critical issues of the day.
It's believed a Linden police officer shot and killed his entire family. Today, 5 people were found dead in his Spanish Fork home, including the officer and his 2 children, just 5 and 7 years old.
Authorities say Linden police officer Joshua Boren shot and killed his mother-in-law, wife, and 2 young children before turning the gun on himself.
That's actually not a clip from a documentary. It happened last week here in Utah as the Sundance Film Festival got underway. Back home in New York City, a 21-year-old woman and her 2 daughters, ages 2 and 1, were found stabbed to death over the weekend. The victim's husband has been arrested in Texas. Police had reportedly investigated 2 incidents of domestic violence at their home this year. The list of such tragedies is long, but they're often not named for what they are, part of an epidemic of intimate partner violence. In fact, there's a documentary here at Sundance that deals with that very issue. It's called Private Violence, and it highlights the struggles of survivors and the advocates who support them. Set in North Carolina and directed by Cynthia Hill, the film follows advocate Kit Gruelle, who is herself a domestic violence survivor. This is a trailer, a warning that this is footage that's disturbing.
I do this work because I survived a really violent relationship, and it took me getting into this work and understanding it to really see that it's just so widespread.
This last time, he almost killed me in front of my daughter.
But what happened to you shouldn't happen to anybody ever.
I know that. That's why I'm here.
What do your parents have to say about it?
Why didn't you just leave?
Did he ever threaten to kill you?
Yeah, lots of times.
She is still living, correct?
She's still alive. The local prosecutor, he declined to prosecute because he said she should have tried to get away from him. If he was convicted only of misdemeanor assault on a female, what would he be looking at as far as time?
The most he could receive is 150 days in jail.
The daughter and Deanna were back in the cab part of the truck. He just started beating on her.
Martina asked him over and over, why are you doing it? Why are you hurting my mama?
Once he got back to North Carolina, he was interviewed by law enforcement and admitted to beating her so badly that he almost broke his fingers.
As an advocate, there were so many injustices that I felt like happened with her. Martina was removed from Deanna. That really angered me.
What was it like when they came and took Martina?
It destroyed me. She still asks me why I gave her away.
Because she remembers it.
Yeah.
Our criminal justice system requires that she be beaten enough to satisfy the system. And by the time it gets to that point, she's already been so worn down psychologically and physically and emotionally. You know, the courts have told her that she doesn't have value, and her partners told her that she doesn't have value. Perhaps family and friends have done that through their actions with her. Why don't you just leave him? Why are you staying with him? That's when it's really time for advocates to really step up. Luckily, the feds picked up the case, and it's going to be prosecuted under the Federal Violence Against Women Act. If he doesn't go to prison, he will turn around immediately and start to hurt women again.
If we weren't going to do anything, then maybe nothing was going to be done, and something had to be done.
I'm not going to let him get away with what he done to me, my daughters. Nobody should get away with this. Nobody.
I'm always so astonished and moved at the people who want to come into this movement and do this work, because it's not easy work. It can be heartbreaking and frustrating, but it can also be unbelievably uplifting. You witness victims shedding that skin and just leaving the violence behind.
The HBO documentary film Private Violence is currently at the Sundance Film Festival. I sat down Tuesday with the film's director, Cynthia Lynch, and advocate Kit Gruelle. I started by asking Kit to talk about her own story.
I survived a very violent marriage that ended with the death of my husband 34 years ago. And he was killed in an accident offshore in Louisiana. And it just was, the whole experience was so astonishing. And it took a long time for me to start to pull myself together. But then I took my boys and moved down from the mountains to the Chapel Hill area. And I saw an ad for a training opportunity for crisis line volunteers for the domestic violence program. And I went to the training. And I felt like I had just been, that I'd found my emotional home, my spiritual home, my intellectual home, and it just fit with my personality type because I feel very strong. I'm a human rights activist, but to me, this is so essential because if you can't be safe in your own home, then where can you be safe? And then because of my own experience, I just recognized that it wasn't just the abuser that the victim had to deal with. It was also these oppressive systems who would marginalize her and judge her and stigmatize her and make her feel like she was doing something wrong. And so I wanted to challenge that too.
Can you tell us your story? When you talk about being a victim of domestic violence, I think what happens is people just say that phrase and then other women who go through it think, well, if it's not described, they think that I can't be going through what they call domestic violence.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because a lot of people believe that domestic violence only happens to poor and educated women. In my case, my late husband had been, he'd gone into Vietnam and gone to the Vietnam War as a Marine. And so he was trained by the Marines to be aggressive, to hunt people down and kill them. And he told me repeatedly that if I ever tried to leave, that there wasn't a place on the planet that I could go to get away from him. And so the reality for battered women is they just learn to live with the violence because, unfortunately, for a great number of women, when they do make that bold move, what I often refer to as a declaration of independence and say, I can't live like this anymore, the children can't live like this anymore, we've got to go, then the abusers oftentimes hunt them down and kill them. And so for us as advocates, we see women have to make the choice of staying and living with the violence or leaving and running the risk of being killed. And we just believe that there should be a lot more options, and that's what advocates work towards. The other thing is that we're so desensitized to violence in the United States that oftentimes women have to be beaten badly enough before our criminal justice system responds. Like, for example, in North Carolina, we have a charge called misdemeanor assault with a deadly weapon. So in North Carolina, a man can shoot or stab his wife or girlfriend, and unless it involves a serious injury or a life-threatening injury, it's going to be charged at the misdemeanor level. And so essentially what that is that's just the criminal justice system giving him a green light to just carry on.
In your case, how did you cope with your children coping with the violence, and what did your husband do to you? The thing that he liked to do most was strangle me. I think he liked knowing that he had my life in his hands, and he'd put his hands around my neck and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, and I'm not going to use the language that he would use, but he'd say I could break your blanking neck if I wanted to. And then there were the things that I refer to as the minutia. He was trying to gain muscle weight. He was a bodybuilder, and he wanted a lot of calories that were protein calories, and so he wanted, every night he'd have a bowl of ice cream, and on the ice cream he wanted peanuts because he said the peanuts were so high in protein. But when I went to the grocery store, and he didn't want he didn't want salt on the peanuts because he said the salt would cause him to retain fluid. But when I went to the grocery store, I had to buy salted peanuts, bring them home, rinse them off in the colander, pat them dry, put them on the ice cream. And then if he came across salt on his peanuts on the ice cream, then he'd come after me because he said I didn't do a good enough job washing the peanuts. And so one of the things that's so important is that I couldn't call law enforcement and say,
I'm terrorized by my husband because I don't do a good enough job washing the peanuts. They'd laugh at that. But the reality of it is the anger is only a tactic. What it's about is control. What it's about is seeing the woman, the wife or girlfriend, as personal property to do with as the abuser pleases. That was certainly the case with my husband, as he just treated me like I was his private property to do with as he pleased.
And how did the kids deal with it?
Well, Jason, our son, was only 14 months old when his dad died, so he didn't see anything. And Matt, my older son, I don't think he remembers much because he was only 4 when Jack died. But it's been interesting for me as a single mom raising boys, wanting very much for them to grow up knowing how to relate to women in respectful and nonviolent ways. And there were challenges along the way because there's a lot of external, misogynistic reinforcers. But I had them at friends' school for a while, and they've grown up to be 2 pretty great guys.
Kit Gruelle, a domestic violence survivor who's been an advocate for other survivors for 30 years. Her story is featured in the new documentary Private Violence, which premiered here at Sundance this week. We'll return to our conversation with Kit, as well as the film's director, Cynthia Hill, after break.